Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our Michigan Game Day edition of the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Our guest today will be Anthony Broome from the Wolverine ON3. First, my view from Section 17 to get us started. We are at the midway point of the season and ready for the stretch run. I think our offense is in a good place. The line is becoming more cohesive. Our running backs, all three of them, are rounding into form. The receiving corps, including the tight ends, has been really steady. And JJ, as we all know, very, very good. I think the best is yet to come from these guys. I really do. The defense has been so good, I keep pinching myself and wondering, are they really that good? Or have we just not been tested? I think it might be a little of both. They are very, very good, but we should hold off on saying elite until late November. After that last three-game gauntlet, we'll know just how good the D really is. All in all, we just have to stay focused and take each day and each game one at a time. I see Urban Meyer has us on upset alert again this week. I'm not sure why, but I am sure no one on this team is looking past Indiana. The Hoosiers had a bye week to add some wrinkles, and they have a new offensive coordinator, so maybe they'll throw a few things at us, but if we play clean, hang on to the ball in the rain, and adjust, we should be good. At his Monday presser, Jim actually answered a contract question. He was asked if he would like to get it done sooner rather than later.
Like anybody, you want to be somewhere where you wanted, and what they like what you do and how you do it. They tell you that, your bosses tell you that, and then that gets reflected in a contract. Yeah, bottom line, any of us, right? That's what we want to be, somewhere where they like how you do it and what you do.
Jim also talked about his gift from the football gods, Mason Graham, who had a monster game against Minnesota.
Really good football player, was in high school, and I thought he was a good offensive lineman. He was a really good tackle. He could play guard, but he was a really good defensive lineman too. He was really good at both of those positions, and it was just a gift from the football gods to get a defensive tackle like him and Kenneth Grant, and which what we really needed. At that time was two big defensive tackles. So Mason started at defensive tackle, played defensive tackle, was starting, as a freshman, had his best game, the fifth game of his freshman year. He's continued on in a great way. So yeah, it's all good there. Effort, toughness, discipline, humility, attention to detail. It's all turning in a great way.
Jim said he has the utmost respect for Indiana and thinks they are improving.
Yeah, they're a gritty team. I've always thought that about them. Gritty leadership, tough outfit. We're going to have to play good. And you're right, they're being more efficient in all phases. They're improving too. Like anybody, it's a race to get better each week and go out and find your identity and play best as a team. I see them on a upward trajectory as well, and we always know that they're tough outfits. So we're going to have to get prepared, have a great week of practice. That's really been key for us. I've noticed the last 3-4 weeks, just getting better and better and having that focus. So just that's what we're doing.
My guest today says the last 2 years Indiana has given us fits for stretches in games, and they might this week too. But like me, he thinks this Michigan team will respond and pull away in the second half. With us today is Anthony Broome from the Wolverine ON3. So stay with us. Here with us on our Michigan Game Day segment this week is Anthony Broome from thewolverine.com and the Wolverine ON3. Great to have you with us, Anthony.
So good to be back. Thank you for thinking of me, and nice to return to talk some Michigan football.
And there is a lot to talk about, and let's start with Saturday. And, after a game we witnessed in Minnesota on Saturday, really hard to find anything negative to discuss. Maybe letting the Gophers run the ball some in the first half, but that would be nitpicking because that was another dominant performance at just about every level, wasn't it?
It sure was. And, in the game of football, you're always chasing perfection. You're striving for perfection. Every offensive play call is, in theory, designed to score a touchdown. Every defensive play call is designed to, in theory, not allow the team to get any yards or have negative yards. So it's tough to reach that. But, when you look at what Michigan did Saturday, you look at what they've done over the last 2 weeks, going into both Nebraska and Minnesota, it's about as close to perfect as you can ask for. And you're right, it is kind of nitpicky when we look at, maybe there's a busted coverage here. You see the touchdown at the end of the first half at Minnesota. But other than that, it is so difficult right now. And oftentimes when we do our post-game analysis or post-game show, myself and Ryan Van Bergen will maybe point out something that bothered us, something that needs to be cleaned up. And people will say, oh, you guys are haters, you're being nitpicky. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, when the standard is set so high and the expectations are so high, you can be greedy and ask for a little bit more. And I think it speaks to the talent of this Michigan team that when you're able to strive for that, somehow there are even maybe a few complaints coming out of a 52-10 win, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, right now they have started to hit their stride. Week 5 and week 6 is where you start to see that. They call them separation Saturdays. And, right now it's tough to complain about anything Michigan's doing on the field.
Well, it certainly is. And, for those of us who are old guys watching this season, we know every season is different. No two teams or seasons are the same. And I think that's true with the Michigan's offense this year, Anthony. I mean, we look back at last year, maybe the last 2 years. Fast out of the gate, put up a lot of points, ran at will against teams putting up some just gaudy numbers rushing the ball. But this year, I get the feeling it's building, it's getting better each week. And, that is really what you want in a 12-game season, isn't it?
Yeah, you want to see steady improvement. And I know that there are fans that were frustrated that you didn't see those 40-point games, those 50-point games in non-conference play. But you want to be a team that peaks in November, especially with this Michigan schedule, compared to the team that, comes out of the gate firing on all cylinders and then you either maintain or maybe even plateau or fall off a little bit. So for Michigan, it's, it is a process to, not only, they've had to find 5 starting offensive linemen that they're happy with to gel and come together. You've had some of the backs coming off injuries and shaking some rust off. You have a passing game that is still coming into its own under J.J. McCarthy, who is in complete and total command of this offense right now. And what they're trying to do is become an offense that can, zig when a defense zags. If you're going to sell out to stop the run, guess what? Michigan's going to take advantage of that and carve you up in the pass game. And if you're going to drop, guys back in the coverage, we know what they have the capability of doing as a running team. So, for me, each week you want to see that incremental progress. I know the Bowling Green game was frustrating. But obviously, that's a major outlier compared to the other 5 games this year so far. And what we've seen from this team is just continue to take those incremental steps forward. And offensively, I know the numbers aren't gaudy when you look at, maybe where they rank nationally, but they're still running these teams off the field. They're imposing their will early, and they're handling their business. And I think the most telling stat of all is J.J. McCarthy's only thrown 4 passes in the fourth quarter of any game this year. So it's pretty impressive what they're doing right now. And even if the numbers aren't, sexy, so to speak, if that's the word you want to use, they're handling their business and they're getting their starters out of the game early in the second half.
At Jim's presser on Monday, he talked about how JJ is just so good at every aspect of his game. For fans and media folks that don't see him, on a national level or just look at stats, they might question whether he's really that good. But I think Jim is right. He is a selfless leader. And the stats really don't matter to this kid, do they?
No, I don't think they do. I think the most important stat for a guy like JJ is first and foremost to get the win. The stat that Michigan always has used to grade its quarterbacks, even when Cade McNamara was starting, is that, do the drives that you lead and in points and in touchdowns. And most of theirs do under McCarthy. And I think with him, again, the numbers haven't been gaudy, but if you're someone who just does more than watch box scores, you're seeing a guy who his mechanics are cleaned up from last year, doesn't quite have the happy feet that he had at times last season, though he still kind of slips into that at times. His improvisational skills, some of the backyard football type of stuff that he has done, especially with Roman Wilson, has been so incredibly impressive. So for me, you look at McCarthy and, arm talent is there. He's been more decisive as a runner as well. I think that's been a huge step in his development. He just seems so calm and collected and in command of this to where, again, we talk about setting that baseline and then expanding each and every week. I think there's, when you ask the question of how much can we put on this guy's plate, I really think the sky's the limit. So, what we've seen from him, I think, is encouraging. I think that he will only continue to get better as we get into the meat and potatoes of conference play here. And, I think that I have no issue saying right now, when you play those 3 games in November that everyone's talking about, at Penn State, at Maryland, home against Ohio State, you're going to have the best quarterback on the field. And I think that that's the biggest key to keeping this train rolling. And I think that's why I would still pick Michigan to kind of roll through the Big Ten here.
Yeah, I just love everything JJ is doing. If I had his ear, the only thing I would say is on those 2 touchdown runs on Saturday and at other times this year, we've seen him get hit. So whenever I'm watching him take off like that, I'm saying, get out of bounds, buddy. We can't get you hurt.
Yeah, I think that's what the coaching staff is telling him too. I think every time he kind of pulls that ball and starts to run with it, there's a shortness of breath that comes over the sideline. But he's also a guy, and I know there's a lot that's been made about this too. Like, former hockey player, not afraid of that contact. He's a tough kid. He's going to play through pain if there is some. Some were concerned about maybe his ankle not in the best of shape coming out of this last game, but he's fine. JJ's a gamer, and we have a guy that has that kind of mentality. In addition to the skill set he does, it's where you start to show yourself as a special guy in terms of where you rank among quarterbacks in program history, in my opinion.
Well, I think at this midway point of the season, a lot of fans are feeling better about the running game because Blake is Blake again. Donovan, more of a dual threat this season, which is good. Kalel Mullings, a really nice and different kind of back. So I think we are in great shape in that running back room with those 3 guys, aren't we?
I think so. And Blake, you're right. I think Corum is kind of, to me, he looks like vintage Corum. I know he doesn't quite have the burst that he maybe had that 2021 season, but we know that he put on some weight last year and even some muscle this year to, be that tough back that's going to pick up those extra yards. And, I have zero concerns about him. I think as his offensive line continues to get better, we'll see him maybe put up some of those more gaudy numbers that we saw last year. Donovan Edwards, again, it's been a little bit frustrating at times, but I think the last 2 weeks, I think we've seen him run as hard as he has all season. I think that, he is so close to that breakout game. And the way I see it, you're 6 games into the year, the longer that we go without, Donovan Edwards making that huge impact, I'm not worried about it because I think it's going to make that much more violent the return to the law of averages, where I think that he is maybe, one of the bigger pieces of this offense down the stretch here. So not concerned about that. I really do think he is close, but Khalil Mullings breaking out is a huge development for them. He's a guy. He's got that power. He's got the wiggle. He's showing himself to be more than just a guy who you give the ball to in short yardage and kind of mop up situations. And if this thing is becoming like a three-headed monster, I mean, that just makes Michigan all that more dangerous on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing I like about Khalil is he's not just big, he's got some wheels on him too.
He does. And I think that, that stood out. I think our first look at him at running back was in last year's spring game. And that was kind of like, whoa. I mean, it was impressive. And, as he's starting to get more acclimated to that running back room, I think he's played his best football. I know last year there was some of the, it was kind of an adventure on the goal line. I know he had that fumble against TCU, I believe it was. But yeah, I mean, the more reps you get in that room, I think the more comfortable you are. And let's call it what it is too. I mean, those guys are arguably coached by the best running back coach in college football, and Mike Hart. So he deserves a lot of credit for that.
So we have to feel really good about our running back room right now. One of the things I still get email about, and it sort of, makes me laugh, is about our wide receivers. And in general, the emails would say, hey, we've got to develop some of these young receivers because Cornelius and Roman are good, but we need the game breaker, the over-the-top kind of guys, and they aren't it. And I would always tell them, be careful. Cornelius and Roman are pretty darn good receivers. And from blocking, which goes unnoticed by a lot of fans, to route running, these guys, I think, both deserve a lot more love, don't they?
I think they do. And let's call it what it is. This isn't Ohio State where you're bringing in guys. You're basically building a fantasy football team through the recruiting acquisitions you make, or you bring in the 5-star guys, future first-round picks. Now, would Michigan like to have more of that? Absolutely. I mean, that just adds another dimension to your offense. But for what Michigan wants to do offensively, those guys have been pretty darn good. Roman Wilson especially has caught, obviously, everyone's eye with the 8 touchdowns so far this season. He switches that number 1 jersey, which I know we're no stranger to what that burden comes with that when you wear that at the University of Michigan. He's been terrific. Cornelius Johnson, I think, has been steadier than we have seen him in his career. You still want some of those drops to get ironed out. And sometimes he's not always locked in terms of run blocking. But, if you want to get the ball and you want to see the field with this program, you better get out there and run block too. And I think both those guys have done a pretty good job of that. It's gotten better over the last several weeks. I mean, neither of them are probably candidates to win, the Biletnikoff Award. I mean, Roman Wilson catches 16 touchdowns this year. We certainly maybe throw him in that mix, but those guys have been steady and I think perfect for what this offense wants to do.
Well, outside of the Michigan media orbit from the national guys, it seems like what they think of this team always kind of has an asterisk, and that says they haven't been tested. And we know we will be, and winning your games is all you can do. But do you think part of that is true and we really can't be sure yet just how good this team is?
Yeah, I think that so much of you can only play the schedule that's in front of you, right? I mean, Jim Harbaugh doesn't make the schedule. Michigan players don't make the schedule. They just have to play who they face each week. And that's where I think their attitude of taking things one week at a time, treating every week like it's, the Ohio State week, that's huge for them. That is what is going to keep you focused, keep you locked in. You work and you hone in on those little details and you go from there. Again, when the schedule is what it is and it doesn't rank very, very difficult, it's more about how it looks as opposed to who you play. And what we've seen every single week, like we said earlier, Michigan's been pulling its starters in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter. They're pulling away. You're kind of hammering teams right off the bat. I saw a stat earlier today. Michigan has not defended a first and goal situation yet this season. That's crazy to think about. Yeah. And when you're playing teams that you outclass, that you're more talented than, that's what it's supposed to look like. So again, schedule sets up obviously the way it does. It gets way tougher in November, but that's when your team should be peaking too. So all you can really do is go out and handle your own business. And I mean, especially the last 2 weeks, that's what we've seen from them.
Well, talk about handling your business. Let's flip it over to the defense. And I think to myself, I've been watching Michigan football since the 60s. I saw great Bo defenses, and there were a lot of them. The 97 defense, and there have been other great defenses through the years, but I'm not so sure we aren't watching another defense for the ages, and I know time will tell, but can you find a weakness with this group?
I think when, it's more about projecting, looking forward. I know that second cornerback job is still something that people are a little weary of. Josh Wallace has played fine, but steady, if not, I won't say unspectacular. Just we know what Will Johnson is on the other side, and they don't quite have a guy that's that type. Which is, Will Johnson was a former 5-star recruit. You're not going to have two of those guys in a lot of cases. But I think when you look at down the stretch, you're going to play an Ohio State team that has all those wide receivers. I like the skill players that Penn State has. That other cornerback spot might be a spot where I'm kind of, I won't say concerned, but I still have questions there. But other than that, I think they're as deep as they've been on the defensive line. I think at linebacker, they're as deep and as athletic as they've been there. And then, you just look at the secondary in general. You've got Will Johnson, who is terrific. Rod Moore still shaking off the rust, but I know what he's going to be. Keon Saab has come into his own. Bakari Page is steady. It's tough to really find many weaknesses there, if any. Again, talk about handling your business. That group has been outstanding. And obviously at this point, we know how great they are in terms of making adjustments and getting things ironed out in game under Jesse Minter. So yeah, I don't have any concerns there at all. I think that's the most sustainable part of this team, really.
Oh, absolutely is. Listening to analysts every week watching games, they keep talking about the depth up front, which it is so impressive. In all of my years of watching Michigan football, I've never seen us roll so many interior guys in, and we also use 4 edge rushers. And you talk about sacks. I don't know where we are sack-wise. I haven't looked at the stats in the last week or so, but the quarterback pressures and hurries are way up there. These guys up front can cover some of the sins back in that secondary, can't they?
Yeah, when you have a defensive line that can rotate that much and get to the quarterback, and sacks can be deceiving sometimes. Like, we're looking more at those pressures. Now, I haven't checked the numbers recently, but I know this is a group that's been disruptive. They're throwing quarterbacks off schedule. They're forcing them into making mistakes. That's the key to everything. And I was listening to the pregame show over the weekend, and Jesse Minter was on, and he was talking about how when some of those defenders, when you can rotate and you're playing maybe 30 snaps a game as opposed to, 65, 70, whatever it is, that allows them to not only stay fresh and be fresh during the game, but it also puts more on your plate during practice week, which is, these games are won between Monday through Friday. Saturday is where the result shows up, but what you're able to do during practice each week and the work you get in, especially, when you're practicing against, Michigan offense that's as talented as it is, those reps during the week are almost more important. So the fact that they are able to keep those guys fresh, I don't think that's talked about enough.
Well, this week Indiana visits the Big House, and, to say they're struggling is probably an understatement. I think Coach Allen is on the hot seat. They fired Walt Bell, their offensive coordinator, 2 weeks ago, have a brand new offensive coordinator. They were only averaging 20 points per game through the first 5. Defense, they haven't been too bad considering they're on the field all day. They're only giving up 24 points a game. But, when you scout this game, it's really hard to see this being a game going into the second half, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Indiana's probably the worst team that they will have seen in Big Ten play at this point. I have no reservations about saying that. It is the worst team that they've seen in Big Ten play to this point. I don't look at what they do as really much of a. Again, Michigan could always come out and play an uncharacteristic game. We've seen games against Indiana in the past get weird when they have no right to be.
Yeah,
we're no strangers to that either. But when you look at this Michigan team, 34.5 points in conference play, that's a big number. And I don't know if Michigan will find a way to cover that. At times they've had issues covering a big spread, but they haven't the last few weeks. I just feel like this Michigan team is hungry. I feel like they're still kind of chasing perfection like we talked earlier. And I expect this one to probably look like all the other ones have, to be frank with you. There could always be a mistake here and there. I just don't see this Hoosiers team putting much of a scare to Michigan at all.
Well, let's look ahead just a few weeks, Anthony. I know the team can't do that. The coaching staff can't do that, but we can at this point. That final gauntlet, Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State. And I think you're like most of us, you've been able to see some of their games, but not a lot of them. But from what you've seen, who of those three teams is the biggest obstacle for Michigan repeating?
Yeah, I think right now, if you're a team that's going to play Michigan, I think you have to have the horses to hang up front on both sides of the ball. And, when I look at that, I think that game at Penn State with, the defense that Penn State has, I think that's going to be a dogfight. I'd say if I was ranking it right now, that's probably slightly a more, a tougher test for Michigan. We know that Ohio State game is going to be a battle. They haven't looked super great, especially in the trenches, but that's going to be a desperate team too, desperate to turn around some of the recent narratives. But you look at Penn State again on the road. Michigan's fortunate that that's a game that's in the daylight. I think that's always a big key when you play a Penn State team there in Happy Valley. But those two games, I would still say that the Penn State and the Ohio State games will essentially be coin flips, and Maryland sandwich in between the middle there. I mean, that is the potential to be a competitive game, a trap game. But I think what we've seen in the past from Maryland is that, just when you think they might be ready to punch through that glass ceiling that they've set for themselves, they kind of show us who they really are. And I wouldn't rule that out being competitive, but to me, it goes Penn State, Ohio State, Maryland when you look at that November gauntlet.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Anthony. There's been a lot of talk about Jim's contract again recently, and the fact that President Santaono has gotten involved and he wants to get this thing done. From what he says, my own opinion, it's a joke. It wasn't done before the season, even with the NCAA investigation. But that's got to get done soon for a lot of reasons, doesn't it?
It does. The NCAA thing was never going to affect, how he was viewed long term. Even if he does get another, a couple of games tacked onto it for next year, which could still happen, this is still your head coach. And the fact that you see that USA Today graphic come out, I think it was last week, where they say that he's the 13th highest paid coach in college football, and I think third or fourth highest in the Big Ten. That can't happen. Not at the University of Michigan. You have the capital to make him the highest paid coach in the Big Ten. And Harbaugh called it Monday afternoon. He said it's been kind of a 3.5-year thing where there's been questions about his contract. It's time to reward the guy for what he's been able to do, for what he's turned around. And when you look at what this Big Ten is going to look like in 2024 with the new teams coming in, and obviously you have Texas on the schedule next year, you need to invest in what is going to be a pretty tough go of it over these next several years. And there's no better coach for the University of Michigan. There's no more accomplished coach that you could bring in. It's time to just pay the guy and put this thing to rest.
I think everyone listening to this would say, heck yes, let's get this thing done, get him signed, and keep him around. So hopefully in the coming weeks we see a finalization to that. Here with us today on our game day segment as we get ready for a home game with Indiana has been Anthony Broome from the Wolverine.com and the Wolverine On3. Anthony, always a pleasure having you on the show. And we thank you for your time and look forward to another visit soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
On Quick Hits today, there is not a lot to talk about on the injury front. Jim says we have the usual bumps and bruises you'd expect this time of the year, but overall, the team is in good shape for Saturday. Here are a few game day notes of interest. Michigan leads the series with 61 wins against 10 losses. The first meeting was in Ann Arbor on November 3rd, 1900, a 12-0 Michigan win. Last year, the game was played in Bloomington on October 8th. A 31-10 Michigan win and a close first half. Head coach Tom Allen is in his 7th season as head man at IU. His record is 32-43. Last year, the Hoosiers were 4-8 overall, 2-7 in Big Ten play, and finished dead last in the East. Their last bowl appearance was in the 2020 Outback Bowl. They lost to Ole Miss 26-20. Now, we all know the weather changes in Michigan, and let's hope that's the case between now and Saturday. Right now, the weatherman says temps around 50 at kickoff and a 90% chance of rain. It looks like a steady rain all day is expected. The last 2 years, Indiana has played us tough in the first half. Right now, they are really struggling, though. 2 redshirt freshman quarterbacks, an offensive line that has not opened holes in the running game, and a defense that's not really bad, but they've been on the field far too long this season. So it's hard to see this being a game in the second half, at least on paper. As our old announcer Bob Ufer used to say, though, they don't play the game on paper. If the forecast holds up, it looks like a day to run the football. We'll also need to take care of the ball in those conditions and not give IU chances to stay in the game. Next week, we get ready for a trip to East Lansing and a matchup with those Spartans under the lights. On our Tuesday Visitors Edition, we'll be joined by Spartan beat writer Graham Couch from the Lansing State Journal. On Thursday's Michigan Game Day show, our scheduled guest is Isaiah Hole from USA Today's Wolverine's Wire. So make sure you join us. Also, if you're attending the game on Saturday, make sure you have your rain gear. Kickoff is set for high noon and will be broadcast on Fox. That will do it for another show. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Think victory, beat IU. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!